she will come back. Not because you asked her to, not because you waited long enough, not because you finally said the right words in the right order. She will come back because you stopped needing her to, and that single shift changes everything a woman feels when she thinks about you. Most men get this backwards. They believe if they just explain themselves clearly enough, she'll love herself back into existence. They believe effort is the currency of love, that if you just give more, check in more, prove more, she'll remember why she chose you. But that's not how attraction works, and deep down, you already know it. Attraction isn't earned through proof, it's earned through presence. And presence requires something most men lose the second they feel her slipping away: their center. Think about what happened in your body the moment you realized she was pulling back. Your stomach dropped, your mind started running scenarios, you reread old messages looking for the exact sentence where it all went wrong. You wondered if there was a version of last week where you said one different thing and none of this happened. That response isn't weakness, it's wiring. Your nervous system read loss, and it panicked, the same way it would with any other threat. But here's what nobody explains to you in that moment. How you respond to that panic is the whole game, not what you feel, what you do with it. Women don't leave men who are calm. They leave dynamics that have gone stale, dynamics where they became the only source of energy in the relationship. And if you respond to her pulling away by pulling closer, by explaining, defending, chasing, you don't fix the dynamic, you confirm it. You prove in real time that the thing she was starting to feel, that she had become your entire emotional weather system, was true. So let's talk about what actually happens in her mind when a man stops chasing. At first, she notices the silence and assumes it's temporary. She expects a message. She expects the version of you that used to check in, that used to need a reply before the day felt normal. When that message doesn't come, something small happens inside her, something she probably won't admit even to herself, a flicker of surprise. Not relief, not yet, just a break in the pattern she was used to predicting. Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. Women don't fall out of love with men who disappear angrily. They fall out of love with men who disappear emotionally while still being physically present. The slow fade, the low-grade resentment, the quiet withdrawal of interest, that's what kills something. A clean, dignified absence is different. A clean absence doesn't confirm that you stopped caring. It confirms that you stopped performing. And that distinction is everything, because a woman's attraction isn't just built on safety. It's built on the tension between safety and unpredictability existing at the same time. Too much of one and it collapses into boredom. Too much of the other and it collapses into anxiety. You've probably lived both sides of that stretch. The stretch where everything was steady and comfortable, and, if you're honest, a little flat. And the stretch where nothing felt certain and your chest stayed tight for weeks. Real attraction lives in the narrow space between those two states, and almost no one is taught how to stand there. So, here's the truth most men resist when they first hear it. She didn't leave because you weren't good enough. She left because somewhere along the way, the exchange stopped feeling like an exchange. You started giving from a place of fear instead of abundance. You started reading her mood before you decided your own. And she felt that shift long before she could name it. Not because she's cruel, because people can feel it when someone else's peace depends on them. It doesn't feel like love from the inside. It feels like weight. If you write wait in the comments right now, some of you already know exactly what that felt like from the other side because you've probably carried it too for someone else at some point in your life. So, what do you actually do with this? Not in theory, in your actual ordinary days. You stop narrating your progress to her. You stop hoping she notices the version of you that's rebuilding. You build it because you decided to, not because you're staging it for an audience of one. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this process, because if you're only becoming disciplined so she'll come back, you haven't actually changed. You've just found a more patient way to perform for her. Real change looks boring from the outside. It looks like going to sleep at a decent hour. It looks like finishing the projects you kept putting off. It looks like sitting with an uncomfortable Tuesday night instead of reaching for your phone to check if she looked at your story. Nobody claps for that, but that's exactly the part that rebuilds what she was drawn to in the first place. Because what she was drawn to was never your words, it was your center of gravity. And gravity isn't loud. Gravity doesn't ask to be noticed. Things simply start orbiting it again on their own without being pulled. There's a specific moment worth naming here because almost every man goes through it and almost no one talks about it. It usually happens around the 2 or 3 week mark. You've held the silence, you've kept busy, you've told yourself you're fine, and then one evening, out of nowhere, it hits you all at once. Not a small wave, a full one. You remember a specific detail, the way she used to laugh at something stupid, the exact shape of an ordinary Sunday you didn't know you'd miss until it was gone. In that moment, every argument for reaching out sounds completely reasonable. Your mind will build an entire case for why this time is different, why one message won't undo the progress, why she's probably wondering the same thing right now. This is the moment the whole process is actually decided. Not the first week, not the calm, easy stretch where staying quiet feels almost effortless because the sting hasn't fully landed yet. It's this exact moment when the ache is loudest and the justification sounds most convincing that everything you've built up to this point holds or collapses. And here's the uncomfortable part. Nobody is coming to stop you. There's no alarm that goes off. The only thing standing between that moment and a message you'll regret sending is a decision you make quietly, by yourself, with no one watching. Here's something worth sitting with. Silence is not a punishment you're handing her. If you're using it that way, she'll feel the resentment underneath it, and resentment doesn't attract anyone. Real silence is, I'm no longer available on demand because I'm using this time to become someone I actually respect. Those two silences look identical from the outside. They feel completely different from the inside, and she will feel which one you're living in, even through a phone screen, even through weeks of no contact at all. While you're doing this quietly, something starts happening in her mind that has nothing to do with logic. The brain doesn't like unfinished stories. When something ends cleanly, with closure, with a clear conversation and a clear reason, it gets filed away. But when something ends with a man who simply became calmer, steadier, harder to read, that story doesn't close. It stays open. And an open story gets revisited, especially late at night, especially in quiet moments, especially when a new situation reminds her of the version of you she can't quite explain to her friends, because he just got weird and stopped texting doesn't capture what she actually felt. And while that story stays open in her mind, something else is happening that most men never consider. She's out living her life, meeting new people, having new conversations, and every one of those interactions becomes an unconscious comparison. Not a deliberate one. She's not sitting there scoring men against you on a checklist, but the brain compares automatically, constantly, without permission. A new conversation that feels eager but shallow gets measured quietly against a memory of depth. Attention that arrives too easily starts to feel less interesting than the version of you that became harder to read. This isn't something you can engineer or speed up. It's simply what happens when someone has the space to notice what they had instead of being handed constant reminders of it. This is where most men destroy their own progress. They hold the line for 11 days and then, on a slow Thursday night, they send the message that says too much. Not because the message itself is dramatic, because the tone gives away that you've been waiting. And waiting men feel safe. Waiting men do not feel magnetic. There's nothing wrong with eventually reaching out if that's genuinely what you want to do, but reach out because you have something real to say, not because the silence finally broke you. If she reaches out first, and eventually a meaningful number of them do, the instinct is to match her energy with excitement, to prove how happy you are to hear from her. Resist that instinct, not out of a game, out of respect for what you've actually built. You respond warm, brief, unhurried. You don't interrogate where she's been. You don't bring up the argument that ended things. You let the conversation be light enough that she has to lean in to find the depth instead of you handing her the depth immediately the way you might have before. Because here's the truth about how women experience reconnection. It's rarely rational, rarely a checklist. It's almost entirely about contrast. The man she left and the man she's talking to now have to feel like two different people, or nothing shifts. If you're the same man with the same tone and the same urgency, she's not experiencing anything new. She's just experiencing the same relationship with a longer gap in the middle. There's another layer to this that's worth understanding before it happens to you, because it will happen, and it catches most men off guard. Sometimes she doesn't reappear with a direct message at all. She reappears sideways. A like on something you posted months ago, a view on your story that shows up at an hour that feels a little too deliberate to be random, a mutual friend mentioning, almost too casually, that she asked how you've been. These aren't accidents, and they aren't nothing, but they also aren't an invitation to sprint back to your phone and hand over your full attention the second it happens. This is a form of testing, usually not even a conscious one on her part. She's checking, quietly, whether the man who went silent is still emotionally sitting by the door waiting, or whether he's actually moved forward the way the silence suggested he had. How you handle this small, easy-to-miss moment tells you more about your actual progress than any amount of self-talk. If a single old story view sends you spiraling back into checking her profile 10 times a day, that's useful information, not a failure. It just means the work isn't finished yet, and that's fine, because this was never going to be instant. If it barely registers, if you notice it, feel a small flicker of something, and then go back to your day without rearranging your evening around it, that's the version of you this whole process has been building toward. Somewhere in the middle of this process, you'll notice something in yourself. The checking becomes less frequent. You stop opening the conversation thread just to look at the timestamp of her last message. Your thoughts stop rehearsing conversations that haven't happened yet. This is the actual turning point, and it has nothing to do with her. It's the moment your nervous system stops treating her attention as the thing that regulates you. Most people think transformation shows up as a big, visible event. Usually it shows up as an ordinary Tuesday where you realized you forgot to check your phone for 6 hours and didn't panic about it. Here's something worth understanding clearly, because it changes how you carry the next part of this. Women sense emotional dependence before they can articulate it. In the beginning, being someone's whole emotional center feels flattering. Then it starts to feel like a responsibility. Eventually, if it goes on long enough, it starts to feel like a weight they have to manage carefully, the way you'd manage something fragile. Nobody wants to be careful around the person they're supposed to feel free around. When you release her from that role, you're not being cold. You're giving the relationship back its air. So let's say time passes and she does come back. This is the part nobody prepares you for, because getting her back was never actually the hard part. Staying the version of yourself that made her come back is. If she returns and you immediately collapse back into old patterns, over-explaining, overcompensating, apologizing for things you don't need to apologize for, the exact dynamic that pushed her away in the first place starts rebuilding itself within weeks. Nothing has actually changed. You've just reset the timer. So the discipline doesn't end when the message comes through. If anything, it matters more, because now there's a real relationship to protect instead of an idea to chase. You don't punish her for leaving. You don't bring up the weeks of silence like a debt she owes you. You don't test her to make her prove herself as some form of quiet revenge. None of that is strength. That's just pain wearing a strategy. Real strength looks like letting the relationship rebuild at its own pace, letting trust return in layers instead of demanding it all back on day one because you're tired of waiting. And here's the part that will matter even if she never comes back at all, because that possibility deserves to be said plainly instead of hidden behind reassurance. Sometimes the silence doesn't end in reunion. Sometimes it ends in nothing. No message, no late-night text, no moment of recognition. If that happens, everything above still isn't wasted, because you weren't doing any of this purely as a strategy aimed at her. You were doing it to become someone your own life doesn't require an escape from. That person doesn't need her return to feel finished. That person was never actually incomplete. He just forgot that for a while. There's a particular kind of freedom that shows up once you stop measuring your progress by her behavior. You stop counting days since she last responded. You stop treating her Instagram activity like evidence in a case you're building. You start measuring your progress by something much steadier. How little her silence shakes you now compared to 3 months ago. How much clearer your own days feel without a running commentary of her possible reactions playing in the background. If you've ever caught yourself refreshing a conversation that hasn't changed in hours, write refreshing in the comments, because that habit is more common than almost anyone admits, and naming it out loud is usually the first step to actually dropping it. Let's talk about what this looks like long after the initial ache fades, because that's really the part worth building toward. Picture an ordinary version of your future, not a dramatic one. You're not performing recovery for anyone. You've built routines that have nothing to do with her existence. Your standards have quietly risen without you announcing them to anyone, the way standards tend to rise once you stop tolerating what used to feel normal. And if she does eventually reappear in your life, whether that's next month or next year, she's not meeting the man who fell apart. She's meeting someone calmer, someone slower to react, someone who listens without needing to fill every silence, someone whose mood doesn't depend on the last thing she said. That version of you doesn't need her validation to feel real. And that's exactly what makes people, not just her, but people in general, want to stay near him. Not because he's chasing anyone's approval, because he's finally stopped auditioning for his own life. There's one more thing worth saying plainly, because it tends to get lost underneath all the talk of silence and discipline. None of this is about becoming unreachable or cold as a permanent way of living. The goal was never to build a wall and call it strength. The goal was to stop handing your entire emotional stability to someone else's mood, so that whoever eventually stands close to you, her or someone new, gets the version of you that chooses to be there, not the version that's terrified of being left again. A man who's healed doesn't perform distance. He simply isn't desperate anymore. And those two things look similar from a distance, but feel completely different up close. You'll know this shift has actually taken root not by how she responds, but by how ordinary your peace starts to feel. The first few weeks, calm feels like something you have to manufacture, a performance you're putting on until the ache fades. Eventually, if you stay consistent, it stops being a performance. It becomes the default setting you return to, the way your shoulders used to tense automatically, and now they don't. That shift, quiet, unannounced, unnoticed by almost anyone around you, is the entire transformation this video has been describing. So here's where this actually leaves you. If she comes back, it won't be because you waited well enough or said the perfect thing at the perfect time. It'll be because the version of you she left no longer exists, and the version standing in front of her now is someone worth staying curious about. And if she doesn't come back, you still don't lose, because the discipline, the steadiness, the self-respect you built in the space where her attention used to live, that doesn't disappear just because the story didn't end the way you originally hoped it would. Either outcome, you walk away with the same thing, a version of yourself that isn't waiting on anyone's permission to feel whole. If any part of this described exactly where you are right now, stay around. This channel exists for exactly this stretch of the process, the quiet, unglamorous middle where most people give up because nothing looks like it's working yet. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of clarity when things feel uncertain, and I'll see you in the next one.